Good afternoon, everyone. Good. We're back in person. Wonderful to see everyone. Welcome, Mayor Trzaskowski, outside guests, students, and faculty. Welcome, everyone, to this very, very special opportunity to engage in dialogue. My name is Uwe S. I'm faculty director of the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. The Georgetown Global Cities Initiative is an academic community dedicated to the creating and sharing of interdisciplinary knowledge of cities, their communities, and the unique opportunities associated with unprecedented global urbanization. Thank you so much, Mayor Trzaskowski, for being here today, and Professor Anderson for your engagement as well. Thank you. I'd like to thank our supporting partners for this event and like to call out Stephen Bossiker, who's here, thank you, of the German Marshall Fund's Cities Program. I'd like to acknowledge Mo Elathy and Julia Newton at the Institute for Politics and Public Service. I'd like to thank Professor Katrin Sieg, the director of the BMW Center for German and European Studies. And I'd like to thank Professor Catherine Donato, of the director of the Insitute for the Study of International Migration. The structure of today's program will be that the mayor will offer prepared remarks. Professor Anderson will engage the mayor in dialogue. And in the third of the program, we will open it up for questions. And we'd like to prioritize questions from students first and then from members of the public. Now I'd like to invite Agnera, Global Cities student scholar and master's candidate at the McCourt School, to formally introduce the mayor and Professor Anderson. Elena.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Uwe. So also thank you to the Global Cities Initiative. It's thanks to this initiative that I was able to conduct research on cities for the past 2 years, which I believe is important because a lot of the solutions to the problems we face today lie at the local level, where there's trust, accountability, and greater democracy. So I'm very excited for this conversation today. So I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Rafał Trzaskowski, and Professor Jeffrey Anderson, who will be moderating the discussion. So Rafał Trzaskowski has served as mayor of Warsaw since 2018. He's a member of the European Committee of the Regions and serves on the board of Eurocities. He's a former member of parliament, a member of the European Parliament, and vice chair of the European People's Party. In 2013, he served as Minister for Administration and Digitization in the cabinet of Prime Minister Donald Tusk. And in 2014, he served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. In 2020, he was the civic platform candidate for the presidency of Poland. As mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski has introduced, among other things, a free nursery program. He has increased funding for the Warsaw in vitro program, and he carried out record purchases of clean public transport vehicles. Since late February, he has also led the city's efforts to welcome and receive more than 350,000 Ukrainian refugees. In December 2018, together with the mayors of the capitals of the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, he signed the Pact of Free Cities, an alliance to promote common values of freedom, human dignity, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. He's a graduate of the University of Warsaw, where he studied international relations and English philology, earning his PhD in political science. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. Let me introduce Jeffrey Anderson, professor at the Georgetown University, holding joint appointments at the Walsh School of Foreign Service and the Department of Government. From 2002 to 2018, he served as Graf Goals Professor and the director of the BMW Center for German and European Studies in the Walsh School. Professor Anderson's research lies at the intersection of comparative political economy and European integration. In July 2016, he was awarded the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany in recognition of his contributions to German-American and transatlantic exchange. Welcome, Professor Anderson. with this, we'll give you the floor to Mayor Trzaskowski for his opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Grazie mille. Okay, guys, how you doing? Here's some Polish. Fantastic. Great. First of all, what an honor to be among you and to have a chance to talk to you about the challenges that are before cities. And of course, the pivotal role that cities play in today's world in meeting some of the most important challenges that are before us. But first of all, I got to tell you that I was here twice. First, I was just living for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks just across your gate with my colleagues who were attending Georgetown. I was 19, and I was introduced to a fun life of the United States of America. I can't tell you more details because I'm a politician. Second time I was around was like 10 years ago, and I was lecturing. I was asked to give a lecture on constitutionalism of the European Union, okay? Because we were accepting something which was called a constitutional treaty, and I was asked to talk about it. How dull and just amazing. But there were people actually, asking questions. So it was an amazing experience that someone is interested in constitutionalism of the European Union, if such a thing exists. But of course, now I'm in a completely different role, representing Warsaw. But also I was asked to talk to you about cities, about the challenges that are before us, and of course also tell you a bit about what's happening now in Poland and in Warsaw when it comes to the refugee crisis. And of course then we will open up for a conversation with you. Let me start with one thing, because there's always this question, and I've been asked that on numerous occasions. I mean, is it fun to be a mayor? Especially if you were like, I was a minister, I was a member of the National Parliament, of the European Parliament, I was a think tanker for years. I'm a university professor and I still teach, which allows me to be fresh sometimes and not just focus on politics, and allows me to have a contact with fresh minds, which of course is so important. And it is not easy to make that trajectory, because usually it's the other way around. People are mayors or councillors, and then they go into national politics. And in my case, it was the reverse, because I started with the European Union, and I devoted most of my life dealing with the EU. We were engaged, of course, at my very, very low level in the accession negotiations in the 90s of the previous century. Then I became a member of the European Parliament, a minister, then member of the National Parliament, and then a mayor. Kind of strange, isn't it? And all of my friends were telling me, listen, I mean, being a mayor is so much fun because it is a hands-on experience. It is so exciting, and you build the future, and you address the problems of your constituents. You are on the ground, talking to people. It's all about the future. It's fantastic. And on top of that, no one is interested in what you're doing besides the people you're helping, which is great, because then national media and so on, when you're a minister, they're always asking you difficult questions. When you're a mayor, even of a capital city, you can focus on the job. That's great, fantastic. So I became a mayor. First thing that happened, a sewer pipe broke under the river. We had a problem. Later on, it actually broke a second time, because the infrastructure was not prepared in an optimal way, to put it mildly. So we had a first crisis on our hands. And of course, we had to forget about, building the future and so on. We had to deal with a problem that of course, was a major problem in Poland as such, because everyone was observing it. And of course, I'm not loved by the populist government, so they were attacking me day and night about it, even though I didn't plan that sewer pipe. And I was just managing it for a few months. And of course, why it burst had something to do with the past more than with my 3 months as a mayor. Okay, we've dealt with that. So now we're preparing for the future. We're building and changing the zoning plans. We're attacking the questions of climate change. We're fighting inequalities in the city. Boom! a pandemic comes, okay, just a few months later. The first wave, the second wave, the third wave, the fourth wave, and of course we were dealing with a pandemic because as a mayor, you're on the first front. I'm responsible for 11 hospitals, I'm responsible for hundreds of schools, for infrastructure, for critical infrastructure. So that was a thing that we had to do and focus on that. So not much time for building the city of your dreams. And just as we were getting out of the pandemic, we have a war. We have a war in the East. By the way, that we were predicting for quite a long time. Because when I was a minister of European integration, when I was working in the European Parliament, we were always telling our colleagues from some of the member states of the European Union, guys, come on, don't do business with Putin. I mean, he's just a thug and it's going to cost you dearly. Let's get independent from fossil fuels coming from Russia, because if we don't, we're going to run into quite a lot of problems. And they were saying, you're obsessed about Russia, you don't really understand it, or you understand it too well. And they were not listening. So, of course, unfortunately, history proved us right, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. Fortunately, for years, when we were working in the European Union, when I was a member of the government and so on, we were working on something which we call energy union, which allowed us to introduce certain steps towards more independence from Russia. Because, for example, we've built those huge gas reserves and reservoirs in Poland and other European cities. We've built LNG terminals, which allows us now to import gas from the US. We've also done those interconnectors on our borders, which allows us to send gas and oil in both directions. We've changed the competition law of the European Union, which allows the European Union authority to go after Gazprom and allows it to actually push towards something we call decoupling. So when there's a company which is responsible for extracting gas, it cannot be also responsible for selling it and for distributing it. So at least we are not wasting time, because in a certain sense, we've prepared ourselves a bit for what was to come. But of course, no one expected what we see now. A full-out war, one of the biggest humanitarian crises in Europe from the Second World War, and something that we need to deal with. And again, that the cities and the civil society needs to deal with on a daily basis. And now I would submit to you that being a mayor is an incredible job, and it gives you this unbelievable satisfaction because you're dealing with the true problems, and that you see the effects of what you were doing the other day, and that by being on the ground you are held accountable day and night, and that you are actually thinking about resolving some of the problems, and you see the effects instantly. Because if you are a minister or if you are a member of parliament, it takes years before you actually see the results of your work. And if you screw up, you're responsible. If there's a success, then there are 100 other people taking credit. But if you're a mayor of the city, then you're really dealing with some of the most important problems that are before us. And I would submit to you that those are the problems that we need to resolve on an international level, on the European level, that the things that we are dealing with in some of our European or American cities are really the problems that are the most important problems for the future of our lives. If you start with climate change, this is one of the most important challenges, if not the most important challenge that we need to confront. And if you do not do it on a city level, we're not going to change the reality. And this is my topmost priority in my city. And of course, by fighting climate change, you're also fighting for clean air, you're fighting with the congestion of your cities, you're fighting for equal opportunities. We have one district of Warsaw, which is the poorest, and some disadvantaged people live there. And always the educational scores in that district, which is called Praga, were 20% lower. Okay, and everyone was saying, you know, that's because the people are disprivileged, poor, and so on. When we started finding climate change, it turned out that we actually connected some of those apartments to central heating because we were eliminating coal-powered stoves. And suddenly the educational scores went up by 15-20%. Why? Because it turned out that those kids were simply cold and they were missing school. So we're also addressing some of the most pressing problems that your city can have, and you can fight inequality. Second challenge that we deal with is a problem of inequality as such, because we have a crazy populist government in Poland right now, which decided to target all the minorities. They started a campaign against refugees, and they started a campaign against the LGBT community. And we had to stand up, and I had to stand up as a mayor and say, no, Warsaw is a open, transparent, and tolerant city, and has always been like that. Before the Second World War, we had one of the most heterogeneous populations in Europe. So we have that in our DNA. So we had to stand up against those populists who wanted to destroy that tradition. And it became one of the most important issues for all of us. Anything that you touch, any problem that you might address and you think that it's global in nature, it turns out that if there is no important role for the cities in resolving them, they are not going to be resolved. And guess what? Every day on the streets of your city, people ask you questions. You're not surrounded by bodyguards. You're not just zooming through in a nice limousine. You're just with the people, which means that you're accountable, which means that you need to show the results. Because if you don't, you will never be elected again. Moreover, you lose the impact on reality because you can do it only with the people if you want to introduce changes. And of course, it brings us to the crisis that is at hand right now, which is the refugee crisis. Poland, just a year ago, just 3 months ago, was 121st in the world when it came to accepting refugees. Some of it was connected to the vicious anti-refugee campaign that the current populist government was waging against refugees when the Mediterranean crisis erupted. I was in a previous government, I was a minister responsible for negotiating refugees, and we signaled to the European Union that we were able to actually take some refugees from Syria in order to show solidarity. When the populists won, they decided to immediately renege on that offer. And they started a vicious anti-refugee campaign. And we were 121st in the world when it came to accepting refugees. Now we're second in the world in just 2 months. When the Mediterranean crisis erupted, you might remember that, you know, those boats sinking in the middle of the Mediterranean. And at a peak of a crisis, we had 200,000 refugees a month coming to Europe. And everyone was in panic. No one knew how to deal with that. Remember those refugees coming through the Balkans. Remember the barbed wires on the Hungarian border and so on and so forth. And the paranoia that is going to destroy Europe and so on. 200,000 people coming to Europe every month. We've accepted 300,000 people in a month in Warsaw alone. That's the magnitude of the problem. And of course, what you see in Poland is this incredible solidarity of the people. Sometimes the populists want to take credit for that, okay? They're doing their bit, and that's one of very rare occasions where they behaved in the right way, because they decided to welcome refugees from Ukraine. But most of the things that you see is done by the people, is done by the civil society, is done by the non-governmental organizations, is done by the local and regional governments. By the way, exactly the same non-governmental organizations that were being taken money from and deprived of financing by the populists. Those who are helping the refugees, those who are fighting for women's rights, those who are fighting with children trafficking, those who are fighting for LGBT plus rates and so on. Those are exactly the NGOs that now are saving the day in Poland. And what you see also is quite a lot of improvisation. And this situation is something that no one could predict, because no one predicted a full-out war, but also it's very specific because refugees, by definition, are vulnerable people, but here we are dealing mostly with women and kids. 120,000 kids in Warsaw alone, refugee kids. 100 kids were born in Warsaw already, 100 Ukrainian kids. We've enrolled 16,000, 17,000 kids to our schools because we granted Ukrainians a citizen-like status, access to free education, to free healthcare, to free social protection. That's the magnitude of the problem. But again, a lot of improvisation. There is no strategy. It's very different from what you see in different parts of the world, and that amazes some of the experts, some of the people who come from the United Nations agencies to see what's happening, because there are no pitched tents in our parks. There are no refugees in the streets. They're with us. They're with Polish families. There are no big refugee camps because people simply open their hearts and welcome Ukrainians in their home. But of course, that can't last forever. And that's a challenge that is before us. And make no mistake, Ukrainians are fighting for our freedom as well. And not only for the freedom of Poland, they're fighting for our values, they're fighting for the integrity of the transatlantic relations. They're doing things for us. And by the way, when we talk about values and that, Europe and the United States stand for values and how important they are, these guys are dying for those values. So we better do our job, because it actually shows us that what we do is just very little, but so incredibly important. And of course, we have this incredible part in this conflict that we need to take on responsibly, and we need to step up. Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, calls me and tells me, listen, we can fight, we can persevere because you're taking care of our kids and of our wives and of our families. But we cannot do it alone. We need to share the burden. We need to help the Ukrainians in whatever way we can, because if not, then of course Putin will continue and will go on, because the guy is completely unpredictable. But guess what? The whole world is watching, because Putin wanted to destabilize us. He thought that he will undermine the Ukrainian society. He thought that he will undermine us, that we're not going to be strong enough. And he failed on so many counts. But he also thought that the West will, as always, turn a blind eye, that the sanctions will not bite, and so on and so forth. Guess what? We have some of the strongest sanctions ever. We have this incredible pressure on Russia. Governments that never thought about helping militarily anyone now are helping, under this enormous pressure of the civil society. Because it's such a clear fight between the David and Goliath, between this ultimate evil and this courageous people. Look at Zelensky, like an everyman from an American novel, suddenly becoming a hero. Okay, it's so clear, it's such a clear conflict. And that's why the people in the United States of America and Europe are pressurizing the governments to do things that they never thought they could do, to pressurize companies to get out of Russia. Putin could never, ever think that things such as these would happen. But I've started this with saying that the whole world is watching. Every despot is watching. Every crazy politician in every corner of the world, every undemocratic politician is looking at it and saying, well, maybe attacking another state is not such a good idea, because maybe the people will pressurize the governments to actually do something about it. Maybe the local mayors will do their job. So in a sense, we're all fighting. Even as we sit here, we're fighting for the stability of the world. Big words, but so true. And we're fighting for the stability of the transatlantic relationship, but we also fight for values. Every day, we fight for values. So that's why what we're doing in Poland is maybe not so remarkable after all, because we're just contributing. The only thing is that we cannot do it alone, guys. And that's why I'm here. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, he was in Warsaw. I had an honor to show him what we were doing for the refugees. And he pronounced these very, very important words about security, that the United States of America would defend every inch of NATO territory. It's so important, but also promised to open up the United States of America for refugees from Ukraine, a very courageous move, taking into account your debates about immigration. But we need more, guys, because we cannot shoulder the burden ourselves. And that's why I'm here, to convince my colleagues on the Hill and the administration of President Biden that they should help directly the refugees, the non-governmental organizations, the local government, not only the central government, which is populist and which is now trying to wash its hands of all the bad things that they were doing, undermining democracy, attacking minorities, trying to dismantle our judicial system, and so on and so forth. This is the moment of reckoning. And that's why it is so important and unexpected that we are on the first front. We, the mayors, the people, the non-governmental organizations, and that there's so much to be done. And that the implications of the crisis today in Ukraine are much, much, much greater, much more serious than just the implications for the region or for my city. But there are quite a lot of challenges stemming from that. Imagine welcoming 120,000 kids in your schools. It cannot be done overnight. Imagine helping all of those who cannot go back. But at the end, I want to tell you one thing, that we have that in our DNA as a Polish society because of solidarity. You are probably familiar with the Solidarity movement, our trade union, and a political union which helped us get out of communism. That's how I came here in 1990 to the US, because I was working in a Solidarity office when I was 17, and I met some American politicians who invited me over. And that's where all of those changes in Eastern Europe happened. But now we have a debt to repay, but we need to do it together, because these challenges are not going to be addressed by one city or even one country. And as I told you, as I submitted to you, it has our ramifications for the whole continent and for the Western world. And at the end of the day, again, we are at the forefront. So you cannot deal with any problem, any major problem, without mayors on board, because that's where you resolve problems on the ground. Thank you.
Was very interesting. I have a few questions, and then I do want to throw it open to the audience so that particularly students can get a chance to talk. You mentioned several times that mayors are problem solvers. Mayors can't afford to be political in that sense. And yet, as you also alluded to, cities get dragged into the culture wars. Cities become targets for populist leaders. Cities, in fact, get a bad rap from populists. It's where the elites live. It's where values depart from the heartland values and so on. It sounds like you resist these criticisms from your national government. I'm just wondering, are there things that leaders like yourself can do to bridge the urban-rural divide? In other words, whether it's economic initiatives or cultural initiatives or social initiatives that would essentially ignore what the national politicians are saying and work to build alliances across this divide between the cities and the hinterlands.
Yes. Thank you for that question. I mean, first of all, as you can imagine, I would strongly disagree with those who say that only elites live in the cities. And if you do believe that to be true, just go around your own city and check out whether you are just surrounded by elites. regardless of whether it's Washington, D.C., New York, or Warsaw for that matter. But what we need to do is we need to start addressing some of those questions together. And that's why we've created this association of mayors in Poland, where we collaborate with the mayors of much smaller cities and regional authorities from the rural areas. We go there, we visit them, and at the end of the day, it turns out that we've got exactly the same problems to resolve. Because if you talk about education, if you talk about, for example, fighting misinterpretation, propaganda, when you want to get out of the bubble that you're in social media, then it turns out that there are no differences, whether you are in a big city or whether in a rural area. We just simply need to invest in education. We need to talk to our kids about verifying information and so on and so forth. If you want to fight exclusion, again, the tools are very similar. That's why, when I was running for the president of the Republic, it was much easier for me because I was not only perceived as this guy from Warsaw, because I was always standing with a local authority, with a local leader who was testifying to the fact that we've got exactly the same problems. So, of course, there is this divide everywhere in the United States of America and France and in Poland between the rural areas and big cities. But, our role is to explain to the people that the problems are actually the same. And that maybe global warming sounds like a fanciful idea for a farmer, but if you explain it about the circular economy, if you start explaining what global warming does to farming, then it turns out that we're just about to resolve the same problems, or otherwise we'll run into difficulty regardless of whether you're from a big city or from the rural area. And I am very strongly convinced that if you address that from the perspective of resolving problems, then it will be much easier to explain to the people that at the end of the day, we need to resolve some of those problems together. And that's what the local perspective gives you. It gives you the edge of explaining very difficult things and concepts in terms which are easier to understand by the ordinary people. And again, at the end of the day, we're on the streets. We're not just zooming through in limousines. And that's why maybe it's a bit easier to see the problems and also to look for solutions.
I know you're a member of the Committee of Regions. So this idea of alliances between and among cities that go even beyond national borders is well ingrained in the European context. Do you think there's a role for international, transnational alliances? And if so, what benefits can be generated for local policymakers who are always worried about spending tax dollars appropriately, not going on junkets? How do these international alliances benefit them? How do you make that sale?
It's hugely important because at the end of the day, when we're collaborating with the mayors, we are exchanging the best practices. We're exchanging our own experiences, and they're not so much different in the US and in Europe. And sometimes even if they are, I'm just going to give you an example, then you can learn a lot from them. And there are networks. Mike Bloomberg organized this MBA for mayors with Harvard University, and I was there with quite a few mayors from Europe, and we've learned a lot. But then we've created this network with the mayors of the American cities, and we're in touch all the time. When there was a pandemic, we were in touch every 2 weeks to learn from one another. We had good data from the US. We were telling our American colleagues how we were dealing with some of the problems in Europe, and it was incredibly informative, and it really helped us deal with the problem. I remember that I had a lecture. One lecture was one case. The case was how to deal with blight. Okay, we don't have that problem in Europe, so I thought, okay, is it going to be useful? But it turned out that to deal with blight, and I think the example was from Detroit, the city I know best. The example was that those departments in a city hall were like in those silos. They were not working together. They were like completely separate. So they couldn't horizontally deal with the problem. And then the solution was how to start dealing with the problem horizontally, with the problem of blight. Okay, so even though we do not have that problem in Europe, the solution, like the horizontal thinking and breaking off those silos, was very, very instructive for me to resolve different problems. You know what I mean? So this is very, very important. And I'm just going to give one example. There's an organization which is called C40. It's like the most advanced cities in the world dealing with climate change. And Warsaw is the only member from Central and Eastern Europe. And we collaborate. I mean, Eric Garcetti, my good friend, the mayor of Los Angeles, is the chairman of C40 now. So we work with our colleagues in the US, but also in India, in Indonesia, and we exchange information and we exchange best practices and we learn from one another. So this is very, very important, but also culturally to learn how to deal with things. I'm going to give you one more example. We have this communist past, right? So we're trying to deal with that. And it's not easy because, you know, some of those communists were working for Moscow, but some of them were trying to fight inequalities in post-World War II Poland. Not all of them were black or white figures. And now and some of them were fighting with the Germans, with the Nazis. And now there was this whole debate about, you know, getting rid of some of those names from our streets and some of the monuments, and how do we do it? To what extent does it make sense? And how to deal with historical memory, right? Sounds like a very unique experience that no one could relate to it. And then you come to the United States and you talk to the US mayors, especially in the South, and guess what? Confederate monuments, it's exactly the same problem. And of course, like learning from my American colleagues how they dealt with that was incredibly informative. Because at the end of the day, it's exactly the same problem. What do you do with historical memory? How do you explain that? So there are ways in which we can learn from one another. And last thing I want to tell you, Warsaw now is a pretty homogeneous society compared to most of the American cities that I know. And of course, now it's finally getting more and more heterogeneous, like it was before the Second World War, when we had lots of minorities and we were living together. And that's why I always say that we have this tolerance in our DNA. And of course, we also have this historical memory of problems. But, you know, we were discussing the issues of gender and race with my American colleagues. And I thought, you know, how is it going to apply to Warsaw? And then suddenly there was this vicious attack of the crazy populist government on the LGBTQ community. And it turned out that I needed exactly the same tools that people employ to fight racism. And I had to simply adapt them to a different situation. But when it came to awareness, education, discussion of difficult issues, trying to break those social media bubbles, that the tools were very similar. Even though, of course, the problems of race in Warsaw are not comparable to the problems of race in every major American city.
Student questions at this point? Uwe, do you want to moderate?
I'd like to invite people. We have a microphone set up in the back, so we're not going to run the microphone around the room. If you'd like to ask a question, please line up behind. If you could get up and walk to the microphone.
If I could ask for something, let's gather 3 or 4, because I'm an academic teacher. I can speak for hours.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. So let's hear 3 questions at a time, and please keep it short. Please.
Short. Thank you so much for coming to Georgetown. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have you here today. I was curious if you could just talk.
Could you say what your major is?
Yeah, I'm a 3rd-year student and I'm a finance major. I was just curious if you could talk more about Warsaw or Poland in general, their energy strategy, specifically when it comes to nuclear energy, and whether or not you think the development of nuclear energy could be an opportunity for public-private partnerships and the financing behind it.
That's great.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Yeah, so I'm majoring in international political economy, and again, thank you so much for coming. You mentioned quite a bit about how the Law and Justice Party in Poland has had to sort of backtrack on a lot of their policies about immigration. I was wondering if you could talk more about what you envision the long-term impacts of absorbing Ukrainian immigrants will be on the political landscape in Poland, whether the Law and Justice Party will have to change their platform, or if you think the people in Poland will start to vote differently.
Great
Thank you.
question. Thank you.
You're not Polish. Wow.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Norbert Sobczak. I'm originally from Warsaw. I'm in the Master of Science in Foreign Service. You mentioned a wide array of challenges that Polish cities face. And I think you'd agree with me that cities can't face them alone. They need national support. So my question is more about national politics. With the opposition currently quite fractured in Poland, where do you think that's going to go into the future in terms of building a valid opposition that can bring down this crazy and populist government that we have currently in our country? Thank you.
Gotcha. Okay, so three. Can
So
I?
we have
Yeah, okay. Because then
nuclear energy,
Yeah.
long-term assimilation, and
Yes.
balkanized politics.
Yes, I'm old, but I still remember. Thanks for helping me. Yeah, so let's start with nuclear. It's a very important question, but how to answer it in a telegraphic style. Like we are, as you know, we are dependent in Poland on coal, and Poland is very much different from other European states that our dependence is around 75-80%, right? Now, we are in a better situation than we used to be because we can import LNG and so on and so forth. But of course, it is very difficult to transform our energy dependence overnight, especially that the crazy populist government wasted 7 years. Okay, I was responsible as a Minister of European Integration for negotiating solutions with the European Union, assistance, money, and so on, and most of it was wasted. Okay, now, we all want to fight climate change, and all of us would want to invest in green energy, but we cannot do it overnight. And this is a problem that even if you do not like nuclear energy or gas, that we need to have a transition because, you know, in Poland, just 7% of energy is coming from green energy. So we cannot do it overnight. That's why there is no solution, even if you do not believe in nuclear, there is no other solution because we're not going to have 100% of green energy in 5 or 10 years. And in a few years, if you're going to be dependent on fossil fuels, no one will buy from you because the European Union is just about to introduce so many laws that would be punitive for all of those who rely on fossil fuels. So even if you have a company and you've got nothing to, you're just producing, I don't know, wooden furniture, but suddenly the carbon footprint will be so big that if you rely on fossil fuels energy, which is, what can you do? I mean, it's not produced by you, it's produced by the state utilities, right? No one will buy from you because, the carbon footprint will be so huge that it will not be economically feasible. So that's why we had this huge debate in the European Union about something which is called taxonomy. So which energy sources will be agreed. And one of the answers is nuclear. So that's what we're going to be doing. And yes, for the first time, we have public and private connection, that it's not the state which is investing in those big nuclear plants, but that actually private entrepreneurs are investing in much smaller and safer units, nuclear units. And that's difficult because, of course, you need to explain it to all the environmentalists and for all of the people who want to fight climate change that there are no easy solutions. But even the Green Party in Poland is now starts to think about that they have to be somehow realistic. So if you want to say no to coal, then you will have to accept gas for a while. Okay, and so on. And look at the United States of America. We probably all hate fracturing and shale and so on. But because of the shale revolution, the US now is in a completely different geopolitical place than it used to be. Okay, so you need to look at the two sides of the coin. Now, when it comes to integrating Ukrainians, this is like a huge possibility for all of us because we have a demographic crisis. And now we have a lot of Ukrainians in Poland and some of them will stay, of course, if they choose to stay. So in every crisis, in every tragedy, there is an opportunity and we better use it. But of course, it is acute because this government, the populist government does not have a strategy. They want to earn all the kudos, but they do not want to initiate all the mechanisms which are available in the European Union and in the United Nations, because they want to say, no, we did it on our own, right? So this is a problem. That's why I'm pressurizing all my friends, also in the United States. I'm telling them pressurize the government so that it accepts the coordinated approach from top above, because otherwise we're not going to deal with that. For example, the government simply says, okay, accept all the kids in your schools. 120,000 kids overnight? How? I have 280 kids in my schools. So suddenly adding 40% overnight, it's impossible. So I tell them you need it to have a strategy, right? So we'll accept those who speak a bit of Polish. We're ready. The rest should continue online. And that's, by the way, what the Ukrainian Ministry of Education wants. We will teach them Polish, and if they choose to stay, then they can gradually enter our educational system. We need a strategy, right? But of course, this is a huge chance for all, and also for Poland to be more and more heterogeneous, which we used to be in the past. How's that going to impact politics? I hope it's going to open people's eyes. You know, now they see. They almost wanted they were attacking me all the time because I, as a Minister of European Integration, I said that we were able to accept 7,000 refugees from Syria. 7,000. And the populist government was saying, 7,000, they will destroy our culture, 7,000. And we've accepted, 3 million. So of course, hopefully that will also have an impact on our landscape, on people, and destroy those myths that this government was trying to condone and propagate. When it comes to the internal situation in Poland, you're absolutely right that there's a lot of mistrust on the opposition and competition and so on. At the end of the day, we need to be together. Everyone knows it, pays lip service to it, but people quarrel all the time. So I'm doing my bit. We are in the United States of America, so you're allowed to talk about yourself because it's not allowed in Europe. So I'm the most popular politician in Poland, or number 2, because we switched with the president. Why? Because I'm trying to reach across the aisle. So I also have a responsibility in trying to convince others that we're not just going to polarize, but that we also have answers to some of the questions that people might have. And some of them are quite important. Also, what we are trying to do, I'm just saying in here, sometimes I quarrel with my colleagues from my party who say, party, first party. And I say, of course, but that's your job. You are the president of the party. I'm just a deputy. And of course, I'm going to help strengthen the civic platform. It's very important for us, but it's not enough. So we do the association of mayors, of independent mayors to strengthen the opposition. We invest in think tanks. We're creating this Campus Poland where we invite young people from all over to discuss politics and they're political, but not party political. We've done it last year. We're repeating it next year, where we're able to create those networks of young people who want to engage, but are not necessarily in love with one political party, or are not necessarily in love with me, which hurts, but it's true. And then we are discussing the questions of propaganda, of artificial intelligence, women's rights, minorities' rights, this attack on LGBT community, how to deal with that, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying in Polish, we say you play on different pianos at the same time. That's the recipe for a success, if I may submit to you. But it ain't easy, that's for sure. But we're doing our best. At least I am.
Rapid fire, please.
Yes. Hi, dzień dobry. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you. I'm a culture and politics student, and my interest is in migration. So I wanted to ask you about what you see the city government's role as being in coordinating national, local, and private responses to the humanitarian crisis.
Hi, my name is Colleen Doherty. I'm a master's student in the German and European Studies program. And I am wondering about the difference between place-based and people-based policies within the city and what the city's opting to choose going forward, considering the new migration, if it's a combination of both or one versus the other.
Can you, guys, I'm sorry, maybe it's against the rules, but can you take off the mask when you ask your question? Because I couldn't hear you.
No, it's fine. Hi.
Yeah, could you repeat that?
Sure.
Sorry.
So I'm a master's student in the German and European Studies program, and my capstone's focusing on place versus people-based policy. And so I was wondering with the city going forward in Warsaw or in Poland in general, if you're emphasizing place-based policies or people-based policies or a combination of both.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Cody. I'm studying political economy, and recently Berlin is considering a
proposal to create the largest car-free zone in the entire world. And this would be an undeniably good thing for combating climate change. And I was curious to see what you think is the future for Warsaw and what the future of transportation policy in regards to automobiles will be.
Okay, so I'll start with the last one. That's the future, right? But now the question is how not to throw the baby with the bathwater, because we need to introduce progressive policies in that regard. But for example, in Poland, it's also a question of dealing with poverty and inequalities. Why? Because if you ban the old cars, those who are the worst for the neighborhood, then you're also making the life of the most dispossessed most difficult because they own the oldest cars, right? So what we like, first of all, we do the positive measures. So we invest a lot in public transportation. And I would submit to you that public transportation in Warsaw is much, much better than in any American city. Just came from New York. And I was like, every 20 minutes, in Warsaw, the subway goes every 2 minutes. Okay, the line is, we just have two lines, huge ones, but only two. But we've got buses, trams, and so on. Everything runs on time. Every minute and a half, you have a bus or a tram or a subway, and it's clean. And 50% of our inhabitants use it. Okay, I use it. When I got to be on time somewhere, I tell my driver, no, I'm hopping on a tram, right? So we're doing that. We're investing in green solutions. We're getting rid of the coal power stoves. We're investing in education and so positive measures. But of course, there needs to be also some constraints. And that's what we're doing. The parking fees go up. We're creating parking rights with the European Union money. We're investing in bike lanes and so on and so forth. But sooner or later, the measures that you've mentioned, we are now preparing them for the city center, no emission-free zone like in London and in Paris. That's the way to the future. And by the way, my party hates that. My party tells me, what are you doing? Are you a member of our party or are you with the city movements? You're like leftist. What? And you need to explain that that's the future. And if you, for example, if Warsaw wants some financing from the world and from the European Union, there's no other way. Because, we are richer and richer and richer, so we're not going to get structural money from the European Union, which is usually for poorer regions. You only can get the money and investment if you're investing in the future. So there is no other way. Now it's just a question that first you need awareness, and then you need to plan it well. So as I said, that you do not throw the baby with the bathwater. Now back to migration. I mean, it's people. I mean, that's the most important thing. But of course, we need to think about the differences in Warsaw as such, and we're also taking it into account. Now, the biggest challenges are long-term, because as I said, integrating, like the population of my city went up by 17% in a matter of a month. So imagine, the integration challenges. Okay, these guys there's a very close cultural affinity. We speak a similar language, although I speak Russian, so for me it's much easier. But some of those guys do not trust public authorities. There's a lot to deal with. We are dealing with primarily women with small kids. So that there's a problem of preschools, of opening up our services and workplaces. It's very, very, very difficult with such numbers. And we have our own strategy, but it's not enough. We need a strategy on the national level and on the European level. Why? Because many Ukrainians who are getting registered with our social security number, they ask me a question, should I register? If I register in Poland, will I have a right to social assistance in the Netherlands? Okay. You don't want me to get into details. With the refugees, the answer is simple. No, you lose all the benefits if you register one country, because one first country is the country of responsibility. These guys are not refugees according to the European law. They are displaced people who need assistance. We do not have a system such a detailed system in Europe. So we need solutions on the European level because otherwise these guys will not register, okay? If you do not have a strategy on a European level or on a national level, then you're creating all kinds of problems. Like for example, we have preschools for free, okay? Because that's part of my program. It's the only city in Poland and one of very few in Europe which has that. So it creates an enormous pull factor. You know, many Ukrainians went to a different city and then, you know, they looked around and no, Warsaw's better. And they came back. And we cannot do that. We need to share this responsibility. That's why we need a relocation scheme, a voluntary relocation scheme within Europe. And for example, your President Biden said that the United States will be able to accept 100,000 refugees. So, but we need that to be coordinated from top above, because what happened a month ago at a peak of a crisis, I had to call my friends from different Polish and European cities and tell them, please send 3 buses because, you know, we cannot, we are overwhelmed. And we were sending 3 buses to Vienna, 3 buses to Berlin and to other Polish cities. It was improvised. We cannot do it anymore, especially if we're going to have a second wave of refugees, which is common because you see the escalation in Ukraine. And I've just met 4 days ago, just before I came to the US, I've met those women from Donbass who were there in a war zone for 7 years. And now they moved because after they seen what happened in Bucha, Irpin, you know, the rampage and the atrocities committed by the Russian army, they decided to move, even though they didn't think that they would ever move. So we need a strategy, right? And of course, all of those long-term problems are the real ones. And guess what? Now I'm a hero. I was on CNN. Important people want to talk to me and so on. In a week or two, everyone's going to forget about that because the world's going to move on, and suddenly I'm going to be a mayor of a city somewhere in Europe yet again. So many Warsaws in the United States of America, right? So now's the moment to tell the bigwigs, guys, come on. And it's not just my problem. It's not just the Polish problem. We are defending our democracy, right? And you need to do your bit. So show me the money.
Please join me in thanking Mayor Trzaskowski.
I'm going to say something blasphemous because I spent most of my life, adult life, teaching about the European Union, and I still teach about the European Union, and I teach international relations theory, and I still talk to my students about the European Union constitutionalism and so on and so forth. But it is so much more fun to talk about cities and global challenges and so on and so forth. Don't tell my students. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Mayor, we've only had a short hour today. We look forward to the next time we can host you at Georgetown. Thank you.